Get it from the store?
No, the state, this is the
It's the
state
same
house.
store. I've never seen that in there. All
And they,
those
and they
times,
have, and they have the cummerbund too. They actually bought that, and I used that as a big.
all that time I've been up there, I never saw this.
All right, let's call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order on March 21st, 2018. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman O'Brien. I'm here. Alderman,
Now, Alderman O'Brien is going to be late. He's still up in Concord.
okay. Alderman Laws.
Here.
Alderman Clee.
Here.
Alderman Karen.
Here.
Alderman Harriet Gathright.
Present?
We have 7 members present, right?
We have 6, and we also have Alderwoman Schmidt from Ward 1, and Alderman O'Brien is going to be a little late because of his state rep duties in Concord. We have public comment. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to the committee? Does not appear so. Now, if no one minds, I'd like to move the presentation for the Capital Equipment Reserve Fund down to just before the agenda item so we can get the other pieces of business out of the way, and they don't have to wait for a long time. So let's move that down, and we'll go to communications.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a communication from Mayor Jim Donchis relative to emergency PO request, emergency contract with TDD Earth Tech Inc. for $12,380 to perform sewer repairs. If there's no objection, I would like to accept the communication and place it on file.
Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes.
From Dan Kukin, purchasing manager, relative to the purchase of used undercover vehicles with a value of $17,559.95. I move, Mr. Mayor, to accept, place on file, and approve the purchase in the amount of $17,559.95.
Any discussion?
Just a
Alderman Laws.
Sorry. Thank you, Mayor. Just a curiosity, do we sell the vehicles that we already have, or are we just adding these to the fleet?
I didn't get any information on whether they traded anything in or not.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I might be able to add some clarity.
Mr. Griffin.
The CFO, John Griffin, for the record. These are purchased from dealers or car sellers that are not readily apparent. So these are undercover vehicles. So they're not using what they have. They're getting new vehicles, new used vehicles for that purpose.
But we currently have, sorry, thank you. We currently have undercover vehicles. Are we decommissioning them?
This could be, I'm not sure, as
Yeah,
purchasing
all right.
manager Coogan said, I'm not sure if we do anything with them. I believe that these are purchased for the duties and responsibilities of the undercover officers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that,
If I may,
yes,
they were
Mr.
traded.
Kuchen.
There's documentation. If you look at the last page.
Thank you.
And I think this is drug forfeiture money that is being used to purchase the vehicles, not actual city funds, not tax funds. Any further discussion or questions? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
From Dan Kukin, purchasing manager, relative to an ambulance contract extension with a value of $0, Department 152 Fire. Mr. Mayor, I move to accept, place on file, and contingent upon Board of Aldermen approval, authorize the 1-year extension to the ambulance agreement with American Medical Response of Massachusetts, Inc. for $0 value.
Questions, discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
From Dan Kukin, purchasing manager, relative to the Division of Public Health and Community Service Site Participation Agreement with Mary Hitchcock Memorial Hospital and Dartmouth Hitchcock Clinic with a value of $0. Mr. Mayor, I move to accept, place on file, and award the contract to Dartmouth Hitchcock for a $0 value.
Now, Director Bagley is here and will come forward to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Please.
I don't know if there are questions, or do you want to maybe explain the relationship that's being proposed?
Thank you, Mayor Sanchez. The Division of Public Health and Community Services is a part of the Integrated Delivery Network, which is for Region 3 for the city of Nashua, with a focus on behavioral health and substance use disorder. And a part of the IDN allowed for a contract with Dartmouth and an agreement as a subcontract agreement with the Volunteer New Hampshire to allow for AmeriCorps workers to assist some of the projects that we have through our IDN. And the Division of Public Health and Community Services looks to support one of those AmeriCorps workers at our division to allow for a continuum of care services and support services for some of the substance use disorder work that we do in the community. The individual will be placed at the division for 1 year. And as stated in the memo, at zero cost to the city, Dartmouth will cover the full amount for the salary of the AmeriCorps worker, and they will work with our staff doing outreach, peer support, and doing some education and prevention work with substance use disorder.
Thank you. Questions, discussion? Alderwoman Karen.
Thank you. I think this is a great addition to the Health Department. Any additional help that we can get for nothing to do some outreach is excellent. So I think that's wonderful that you were able to reach out to them and get them on board. Thank you.
Alderman.
Anything else? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion passes.
From Dan Kukin.
Thank you very much.
Purchasing Manager relative to Broad Street Parkway property appraisals, value of $10,000. Mr. Mayor, I move to accept, place on file, and award the contract to Capital Appraisal Association, Inc. in the amount of $10,000. Source of funding is Department 160, Administrative Engineering, Broad Street Parkway Bond.
Discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes.
From Dan Kukin, Purchasing Manager, relative to change order number 4 to contact with North Earth Mechanics to expand construction of the residential setback barrier wall in Phase 2 landfill. The value is $199,763. Mr. Mayor, I move to accept, place on file, and authorize change order number 4 to the contract with Northeast Earth Mechanics in the amount of $199,763. Funds are available in Department 168, Solid Waste Bond.
Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion passes.
From Dan Kukin, Purchasing Manager, relative to the Nashua Transit System, Token Transit, value $0. Mr. Mayor, I move to accept, place on file, and award the contract to Token Transit, Inc. for a $0 value.
I think Director Marchant is here to explain this, so why doesn't she come forward?
Good evening. Ooh, it's a low one. Come up, okay. Thank you very much. So good evening. The idea of Token Transit is it's a $0 out from the city, and it would be an app on your phone that would allow you to purchase bus passes, individual and monthly, and it would also allow us to offer some additional kinds of passes for the system. This is the first time that we would be offering other ways of purchasing bus tickets. We are constrained, and we get a lot of complaints about the fact that the only way you can purchase bus passes is through the transit center, which is open very limited hours, 9 to noon and 1 to 5, weekdays only. So this allows it to be a little bit more mobile, and it's very easy to download an app to your phone and make that work. So it does have reduction in revenue, which we're anticipating with this, between $4,000 and $8,000 a year. But we think the service to our constituents is worth it, and that it would certainly cost us a lot more to buy this software and provide the customer service and all of that with it ourselves. So we would very much like to move forward with something like this.
Discussion? Alderwoman Kelly.
Yes, thank you for explaining that. Sounds like it's a move in the right direction. I do have a question about the reduction in revenue. Do you know what, can you pinpoint what that's coming from?
Yes, great question. So so that the actual providers of the app make some money and so that they can pay their customer service people, they will charge us 10% of fares over $2, and they will charge us 15 cents on fares under $2. So that's an estimate based on the fares that we use. And Token Transit has done this at a bunch of communities around the country, and we did call the people who have used them, and they have great things to say about them. But in average, only about 10% of users will use this system, and so we were looking at about 10% of ridership using this system. So that's an estimate, and that's why it's kind of broad.
So can I do a follow-up? I'm sorry. Thank you. So that 10% is what you think will shift to the app?
Correct.
Do you think it'll increase ridership among people
I think
who
it's
are unable?
potential that it certainly could, especially if we can offer a family pass, which we've been trying to do. It's very hard, say, for a mom to get on to go to the grocery store and she has 2 or 3 kids and they have to pay all individually. It makes it much more affordable if we can offer a family app, and I think it will make it more usable, more user-friendly. And so we do think that should help.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Alderwoman Clee.
Hi, thank you so much. I think this is a great idea. My only question is that we're not going to lose any personnel or staffing.
No, we would not be losing anybody.
Okay, so just a quick follow-up. That would mean that it's almost like having more additional personnel because we can do ticket sales virtually and on the fly, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so in some respects, it's kind of saving money.
I do think
Yeah.
we certainly couldn't do it for this dollar value if we
Right.
tried to do this in-house ourselves. It would cost us a lot more.
Thank you.
Yep.
Alderman Laws.
Thank you. I also think this is a great idea. Who's responsible for marketing this to potential bus riders?
Excellent question. Token Transit has a marketing team that they deploy with it, and they will work with our staff to make sure that we continue to be Title VI and ADA compliant with our advertising, and to make sure that we're hitting everything we can. So they'll be working with several members of our staff to spread it far and wide.
Thank you.
Yep.
Alderwoman Kelly.
Yes, so actually I wanted to kind of follow on to what Alderman Laws was talking about. Do you also get a support system? So if you have tech issues, that kind of thing, does it come from Token Transit?
It does, and even better, if somebody has a complaint or an issue, they call Token Transit. They don't call us. And they have staff who are ready and there and can react and can literally go into the back end of the system and fix things on the fly. So it's not, there isn't a triangle, and we're not sending people around, oh, sorry, you have to call this number. Everything on the app will direct them directly to the Token Transit staff. In addition, we do get all their they will share all their background data and analytics with us of who's buying, what are they buying, and so that I think is valuable data for us that will help us inform future ticket sales. So that would be good.
Thank you.
Anything else? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. Now, are you here also on
Yes, I am.
R 18012? In addition to the change in the order that I already mentioned, I think we should also take the new business resolutions because we have people waiting on those, and those probably won't take very long. So we do have Mr. Mansfield, I believe, who's here on R 18010, correct? Maybe introduce yourself and then explain what the resolution would do.
My name's Bill Mansfield. I'm the radio systems manager for the city of Nashua. The resolution is for a joint memorandum of understanding between the city of Nashua and the city of Manchester. Several months ago, Manchester and Nashua applied for a grant through Homeland Security to build a communication center that basically is a redundant communication center, so that if we had a major catastrophe down here in Nashua with either police or fire dispatch or radio communications, we could go up to a facility up in Manchester and basically dispatch from that location up there. Manchester has the same grant. We received $300,000 in Nashua. And Manchester also received $300,000, and it's basically to build this communication center. Because of the contracts and the size of the contracts that we're going to be dealing with, especially with Motorola, who's going to be the vendor for this, it'd be very difficult for us to get two separate contracts for each of the cities. So what basically the grant did is it gave Nashua $300,000, it gave Manchester $300,000. And instead of making two separate contracts with Motorola for one thing, this memorandum of understanding is basically to allow Manchester to cut us a purchase order for their $300,000. And then when invoices come into us, because I'll be managing the grant on for both Manchester and Nashua. When the invoices come into us, we would take the invoice, cut the price in half, invoice Manchester for their half of the invoice, and then they would submit their payment back to us here in the city, and then we would pay the invoice. So that's pretty much, in short, what the memorandum of understanding is about. So.
Any questions, comments? Is there a motion regarding R 1810? Alderwoman Karen.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve final approval of R-18-010.
Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes, and R 1810 is recommended for final passage. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Ms. Marchand is here. Let's take now R 1812, authorizing the city of Nashua to enter into contracts with Nashua Community College, Riviera University, Town of Hudson, Town of Merrimack, and the Plus Company for transit services. Could you please explain this one?
Absolutely. Thank you again. Sarah Marchand, Community Development Director. This is a contract that we renew annually with the entities listed. For them, they give us a amount that's a discounted rate of rides per the year for their students, and then their students can ride the whole system for free. So we enter into contracts based on a average of the last several years' ridership with them, and so we charge them $1 a ride instead of $1.25. And then their students can ride the whole system for free anywhere, anytime. It's also a huge benefit to the transit system because we cannot use fare box revenue as matching funds to our FTA dollars, but we can use contracted services like this as matching dollars to FTA funds. So it's very valuable to us to have contracts like this.
And please have the record show that Alderman O'Brien has arrived from Concord. Any discussion or questions regarding R 1812? Is there a motion? Alderwoman Karen.
Yeah, make a motion for final passage of R-18-012.
Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes, and R 1812 is recommended for final passage.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we are to the presentation regarding the proposed contract with KRT, Professional Property Revaluation Services. Just to review a little bit, when we met a week ago, Monday was it? Or was it 2 weeks ago? Regarding the potential or the state-ordered revaluation, we suggested that the funds that would be necessary to contract for this service would would be able to come from the SURF account, in which there is a significant balance. And at the time, it was suggested that we give the Finance Committee, the committee that's authorized to make a contract to authorize funds such as this, a presentation regarding the SURF account, how it works, and discuss, any other issues you'd like to discuss concerning the proposed contract. So Mr. Griffin has a presentation he'd like to make. I'm going to talk through the first couple of slides, which should be very brief, and then we'll go on from there. So this just reviews a little bit of what we talked about the other night. We did it, and now David Fredette, City Treasurer, has joined our discussion, so thank you, Mr. Fredette. The first slide just discusses, very briefly in review, this and the next slide will show you the reason we are very concerned about the state-ordered revaluation and why we want to be particularly careful about proceeding and making sure that we get all values correctly. This first one shows you that on the left shows the current valuation of the city, which is approximately $8.5 billion, the assessed value of all the property in the city. And we're talking about the left half of the slide. The light blue column shows you the total value of the residential assessments in the city, which is approximately, in total, $5.3 billion. And the blue column, the dark blue column, shows you the commercial assessments, everything that is not residential, single family or small residence properties, and that totals $3.2 billion. So we have currently 62% of the city's valuation is commercial, and about 37.6% is residential. 62.4% is residential, and 37.6% is commercial. Approximately 2 to 1, but a little bit more, a little bit less. The equalization ratio on the residential property, as you see below, is 0.8, which means that on average, residential properties are assessed at 80% of their true value, based upon the fact that residential home values have increased very significantly over the last 5 years. The last time we had to undergo a state-ordered revaluation. On the right, you see that some sales imply that the commercial equalization ratio might be 0.93, meaning that commercial properties, based upon a limited number of sales, are valued at 93% of real value. In other words, residential homes have gone up more quickly during the last 5 years than commercial values have. The good news, of course, is that people's homes are worth a lot more than they used to be. On the other hand, it has an implication in a state-ordered revaluation that could have some unfortunate consequences. So if you look to the right of this slide, you will see that once the values we showed on the left are adjusted to 100%, in other words, residential goes from 80% assessment to 100, and commercial, based on this limited number of sales, goes from 93% to 100, we now move up to about a $10 billion valuation, except that now 6.6 billion, or 66%, is residential, and commercial is now 3.4 billion, or 34%. So you see that the share of residential has climbed from 62.4 to 66, and the share of the total represented by commercial has fallen from 37.6 to 34. The next slide shows you what the consequences of that could be. On the left, again, we have current valuations, and we, based upon the idea that we're collecting about 200 million in taxes, which is approximately the number, ballpark. We're now collecting 62.4% of the total from residential, or $124 million. We're collecting 37.6% from commercial, or of 37.6 of 200 million, or about $75 million from commercial and industrial. If we adjust the appraisals using those equalization ratios of 80% for residential and 93% for commercial, we see that the relative tax burden would shift to what you see on the right. 66% of the collections of 200 million would now be paid by residential property taxpayers, and 34% of the total of 200 million would be paid by commercial. So that the share of the pie paid by residential could climb from 125 to $132 million, whereas the share of the pie based on 200 million paid by commercial and industrial could fall from 75 million to 68 million, meaning a shift of $7 million from commercial and industrial onto residential, which would result in a property tax increase to all to virtually all residential property owners, which is, of course, something we'd prefer not to see. So we know that this commercial equalization ratio of 93% is based upon a limited number of sales. And we know that the income approach towards commercial property, which values commercial properties based upon the income which is being generated, as opposed to a very limited number of sales, or as opposed to a cost approach, may result in a fairer apportionment between residential and commercial, may result in closer to real fair market values for commercial, which could bring that 93% equalization ratio down, meaning commercial properties would increase potentially more if we really assess their real values based on the income approach. That is why we're proposing that we get KRT to very experts, and you met them the other night, to help us work through this entire process, send out the new assessments to all property owners, to conduct meetings with anybody who disagrees with their property owners, that we have independent experts who are telling us what these properties are worth based upon the most advanced expertise in the field. And that's the contract we're proposing. So where we've gotten to now is that you've got the contract as part of the agenda, but we are proposing that the funds be taken from the SERF, or the Capital Equipment Reserve Fund. And John Griffin, CFO, can talk you through, or will talk you through, or is David Fredette going to do it? David Fredette, City Treasurer, is going to brief us on the SERF account, the Capital Equipment Reserve account, how it works, what the balances are, and what's proposed in the budget that you received the other night. Alderwoman Klee.
Hi. I just have one quick question. The CNI, that includes all businesses, like a restaurant or anything like that, as well as all multi-units greater than 5?
I think it's greater than 4.
Greater than 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
So any condos, any single-family homes, obviously, any multi-unit buildings, smaller multi-unit buildings, 4 and less, would be within the residential category. But anything residential greater than 4 units, apartment complexes, larger buildings, nursing homes, other things like that, those are all in the commercial and industrial category.
Okay, so large, single-unit buildings that they created, different apartments, and that would, if they're over 4.
Right,
That would
so a
fall into-
6-unit building is within the commercial and
Okay.
industrial. One sale that we talked about the other night was the sale of the border, the apartments up at Somerset Parkway. 600 units were sold
Right.
at $65 million against the $36 million assessment. Now, that was a disqualified sale, so it is not included in the equalization calculation, but would have great relevance in terms of evaluating that category of properties by KRT.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no other questions now, why doesn't Mr. Fredette proceed?
I think everybody knows me here, but Dave Fredette, City Treasurer, Tax Collector. Brief overview of the Capital Equipment Reserve Fund, or otherwise known as SURF. On the second page, in simple terms, just think of it as a savings account that the city has. We have many of them, but this is one. And it's strictly for funding equipment in the city. The SURF account has been around in the city since the late 70s. It was changed drastically in fiscal year 2010. Prior to that, what used to happen was when a department needed a new vehicle, like a fire ladder truck, about 40% of it came right out of the department's budget, and about 60% came out of the SURF account. So what we try to do is fund this more aggressively so the departments aren't hit with those costs every year, because fire, police, and public works always has vehicles every year that has to be replaced. And then in 2015, we adjusted a little bit more, where now you actually see the list of equipment planned to be purchased for that next year in the budget. So you get to see that and you get to ask questions on it. So that was the change made in 2015. The goal of the SURF is to fully fund capital equipment vehicles. The majority of the purchases are with cash and some bonds, and there are a few items through grants and trust funds. The grants are mostly transit, the buses. A lot of that is through grants from the federal government. And trust funds are usually related to the cemeteries. They also have vehicles. When we started this, phase one included the Public Works Division, Fire, and Police, since they have most of the vehicles. As you can see, they have about 245 line items in the schedule. And then phase two, which was started a little later, included the smaller groups like school, general city departments, cemeteries purchase, and they all have much smaller needs, and that total is about 60 line items. What we try to do is a 10-year look at needs for each division and department. We review it annually with each division. We actually meet with them, and sometimes it's more than once, especially when we deal with Public Works, Fire, and Police, because, again, they have a lot on their list. The amounts that are in there are not exact. They can be a little higher, a little lower when they go out to purchase. But anything that is over 10% from what is in the budget that you see and approve, we have to notify the Board of Aldermen, and they have to vote on that. It doesn't happen. I think since we've started, we've probably had about five times that we've had to do that. Actually, most items come in under what we budget, which is good. So that helps out a little. It changes all the time, the SURF schedule. It's a living document. This year they may say they need 3 type of trucks next year, but then when next year comes around, they realize they may only need 2, and another one can be put off, but something else gets put forward. So it changes every year. It's not exact. We use an estimator for inflation. We have an inflation factor in there of 5%, so that helps a little too. So each year everything gets increased by that inflation factor. And the dollar value does not mean spend that amount exactly. We try to spend less. That's an overview of how it works. Next page is a description of the money that's in the fund, or the, right now, we have just under $3 million, $2,998,000. There's some items that were deferred, which I'll explain a little bit more on the next page, of $1,280,000. And that's listed on the next page. And that was items that were approved in fiscal year 18, but after the budget was approved, the mayor wanted deferred some items, given that court case we had going on for a while. So now that that's basically settled, the departments will be starting to look at that deferred list and get some of those items purchased. They'll all be coming through the Finance Committee. Almost all of this stuff comes in front of Finance because of the dollar value. So that would give an ending balance of fiscal year 18 of $1,717,000. We proposed in the operating budget for fiscal year 19 $1 million appropriation. We plan to spend in cash $2,053,000 in fiscal year 19, and another $500,000 for the assessment evaluation, leaving an ending balance at the end of 19 of $164,661. The next page, again, is just a list of the items that were deferred at the beginning of the fiscal year 18. And now, like I said, some of these are going through. I know the Bearcat purchase order will be coming forward to this committee. That's the $1,280,000. And this deferred list wasn't just something that we estimated at. We met with all the departments and met with the mayor, and this is a list that they actually came up with that they could defer. And the next page is actually in your proposed budget that you have received last week, and as you can see, it shows you all the items that are planned to be purchased in 19. The first column that says current replacement cost would be the total amount needed. Funded by cash is $2,053,000, so that's on the previous page that I just showed you, 2 pages prior. And then the items that would be bonded. Funded by bond would be, we usually bond just very large items like a fire truck or certain vehicles in public works. I mean, if we had a lot more funds in that account, we wouldn't be bonding, we'd probably be paying cash for everything. But it's extremely hard to do that given the amount of vehicles that we have and the limitations we have with the budget. So we've been doing this basically since 2010. It's worked out pretty good. I know the departments prefer this from the old method. That's the overview.
And under the ordinances which govern SURF, a revaluation is an eligible expense for SURF funds. We don't really have 500,000 sitting around in any other account that's eligible to fund a revaluation. Since the numbers work, we propose that the number come from here. But does anybody have questions about SURF or any of the information that's been presented? Alderman Laws.
Are you at all concerned about only having $164,000 at the end of?
I would prefer it be higher, but it's actually been low. This is not the first time. It's been around that number years in the past. So, okay. What we don't know yet is how is the year end going to be for fiscal year 18. The mayor may decide to escrow some money into the account. We've done that in the past. Sometimes unexpected revenue that comes in, we may be able to put in that account. Those are things we just don't know yet, but 164,000 is on the low end, yes.
Now, what this escrow refers to is at the end of the year, there will likely be unexpended appropriations, things that were voted in the budget for fiscal 18 which weren't expended in various categories across the budget. And those funds can be reallocated before the cap was ruled by the court to be in violation of state law. Those are all cap eligible funds because they'd already been appropriated. But in any event, those can be reassigned into something. And given the short, the number you just pointed out, we may wish to direct some of those unappropriated funds into the SURF account, which we did, I think, in 2 years, at the end of fiscal 17, I think we directed 700,000 into the SURF account, or 900,000.
Fiscal year 16, the end, wasn't it?
We're in fiscal 18, so it was, it was at the end of 16. Yeah, we directed 900,000.
I think it was 717,000.
717. Because, we were concerned, we wanted to have more money carried forward, so that would be, now, excess revenue can also be directed into that account, but that often is used to help with the tax rate. Alderwoman Kelly.
Mr. Mayor answered some of my questions, but I just wanted to know what are the other funding sources in order to replenish this account when it gets down to that low, as Mr. Alderman Laws was pointing out.
The funding sources?
How does the money, I mean, he talked about unappropriated going in there, but what, are there other sources for it, or is that it?
Well, we in the budget, money is appropriated into the account every year. So if you look at which slide was it? Second to last slide, entitled Capital Equipment Reserve Fund SURF Balance Analysis, it shows the appropriation appears in the budget. So under the budget, if passed as proposed, $1 million would go into the SURF account. Now, should it be more than that? Yes, it should. But we're thinking we're going to be impacted by this revaluation, so we're trying to keep things as tight as we possibly can. That seemed like the minimum that we could put in. It should be more, but if we put more in, then the tax rate is higher, and we're trying to mitigate the effects of still the pension increases we were hit with, as well as now the revaluation. Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question of Mr. Fredette. When we purchase a fire truck, we can spend anywhere from about $500,000 to $750,000 for the purchase of the vehicle. And currently, right now, we do have a couple of bonds in purchasing fire trucks. Is that not the better way to go than looking at the SRF account? And maybe we could reevaluate the SRF account accordingly with that?
Well, most of the fire trucks are bonded. The one that's in 19, you can see that Pierce Arrow is going to be bonded $655,000. So most of them so far have been bonded. Not the pickup trucks they might buy or an SUV, but the actual, ladder trucks and all that, they do get bonded.
And the
Alderman
follow-up,
O'Brien.
and prudent financial, because the longevity of those purchases, they last, 15 to 20 years, and so
Right.
therefore, we're pretty safe with the bond. So
Yeah,
this
we-
alleviates some money out of SRF is what I'm trying to get at.
Yes, that was one part of the plan when it was changed in 2010. Yes.
Mhm.
Alderwoman Karen.
Thank you. Just a quick question. If we take that $500,000 out, is that going to impact any of the purchases that need to be done for equipment for this year? Do you think?
No, this list has been reviewed by all the departments, and this is what they plan to buy. So no, there's enough for fiscal year 19.
Okay, thank you.
So the last slide shows you all of the equipment that would be purchased, or that will be purchased if the budget passes as proposed, and there are no pieces of equipment on the list that we would not have the money for.
Thank you.
And also keep in mind that we did defer some items that appear on the second to last slide, which are being purchased now.
Okay.
So that's fiscal 18 money that we're proceeding to spend now.
question?
Alderwoman Kelly.
So my question, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is about what happens when there's not enough money in the SURF account. So someone comes, has an emergency need, that kind of thing. Do we go back into their budget in order to fund it, or do we go to a bond?
We haven't had that happen because we plan very, very well here. So we haven't had that, but if it's a large item, it could be bonded. Something smaller, no, we would probably use cash for that.
Okay.
We just never had that occur yet since I've been here.
Alderman O'Brien.
Mr. Mayor, I think I kind of like this idea, but my question would be to you, Mr. Mayor, if we do take this money out, and with the anticipation, with the reevaluation, and we're going to be making more money, could that perhaps, this money will go back to SURF in some form?
Well, certainly, the escrow process, both the unexpended appropriations and/or revenue which exceeds the projections in the budget, which there will be, could be directed there. But your point is that if in the course of the reevaluation, we are able to increase property values in some sectors, could the additional revenue that we bring in be directed into SURF? And the answer is yes, although that might, these new assessments will be reflected in next year's budget, really, not the one we're considering right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that correct? That's not really correct, is it?
Well, I'm
Considered in next year's budget. No, that's not really correct, but we would have passed the budget and we could, the next time the budget comes around, we could certainly use the additional tax base to increase the amount going into SURF.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do like, and may I have a follow-up? I think
Yes.
what you're asking is basically we're making a loan unto ourselves to compensate for this, and yet we could have the possibility of replenishing in the future.
Yes.
The possibility.
Yes. Now, let's just say, this is the kind of impact it could have. Let's say that, just the revaluation, let's say that we know that ballpark, large residential properties have an assessed value of $440 million, and at their current assessments. Now, if that's at 93%, that climbs to, climbs $30 million. On the other hand, if through the income approach and through a more expert analysis, market-based, of a broader market of those commercial properties, the sale that took place out on Somerset Parkway is more reflective of their value, then those values might go up not 30 million, but 250 or 300 million, because remember, that sale took place at about 55%, at about 180% of assessed value. So if by doing this revaluation, we capture even an additional $50 million, that's $1.25 million a year. I mean, it's a 6-month payback. So, and if we were to capture 100 million, now we're talking $25 million or something like that. So now we've got, a 3-month payback. So the payback on the money invested, if we capture anything additional as a result of using KRT over and above what just a simple statistical upgrade would do, will much more than pay for the cost of engaging KRT. If that's clear, I don't know if I was really clear there, but every $1 million brings in $25,000 of tax revenue. So if another 10 million in value brings in 250, another 50 million brings in $1.25 million, another 100 million brings in $2.5 million each year for the next 5 years. So to leave value on the table because for any reason would be a serious error, in my opinion. Mr. Griffin.
I just wanted to go back. Treasurer Fredette did a great job on explaining SURF, but in 2010, the city did an exhaustive vehicle analysis where they identified each and every vehicle by VIN number and by value and determined the life of each vehicle. In addition to that, they eliminated several vehicles that were on the rolls that were no longer used and useful. So the 2010 was kind of a juncture where we were trying to put in a program that had some sustainability, and we funded it fairly effectively. Now we're at the point where you don't, and David was actually correct with the directors, they don't necessarily want to or feel comfortable sticking with that original schedule. So that's why, as he mentioned, they might not need the refuse truck after 5 years just because it says 5 years life. Matter of fact, a few years ago, Director Photo came to the mayor and said, we could probably get away with pushing that out a year. So living document, that's really what this is. And it's just like we all do at our homes. We decide, do we need a car this year, next year, what have you. So we're very sensitive, and I want to the mayor organized a meeting of the two chiefs and the DPW director and a few other directors, and they really rallied to the cause. They looked at mileage on vehicles, especially police, the fire, possibly coming up with a grant that can replace 3 vehicles with 1. So everybody's kind of bought into this. With regard to the funding, I think we're at the perfect opportunity, and I mentioned that to Mr. Fredette today, to go around and in our annual visit to the different departments to get a real clear picture, take a real assessment of all these vehicles, and then over the next several years, map out the cost. This is a case where we take the vehicle, we project what the cost is going to be several years out. We put that number in there. It's not a depreciation type model where you're funding the depreciation every year. This is a replacement vehicle. So if we bought something today for $20,000, 5 years from now, it's going to be $20,000 plus an inflation factor. And the decision will be made at that time, do we want to replace it or not? So we do have a tight budget. You'll learn that when you attend the budget meetings that, as the mayor said, if we had more money, we'd put it in there. But we have to make sure that we provide the services that the folks have come to expect, and the valuation was part of that thinking. So I just wanted to share that with you, that it's done well. We need to continue monitoring it very deliberately, calling on the folks that help us run the city, and then you all to approve on a timely basis the appropriations. There's other ways of getting more money. We have, you will approve, what's proposed is a contingency account. From time to time, at least historically, when we had money under the cap, we could come in with a supplemental appropriation to propose to you folks that could either take unanticipated revenue or out of fund balance. And the other thing we'll go over in the budget process is we're extremely proud of the fund balance we have. It's more than the required amount, both on a state level and a city level, and we're recognized by Fitch and Standard & Poor's AAA rating. They're very cautious, those rating agencies, because they are basically the ones looking out for the bondholders. So we're well positioned, but it's not to say we have an excess amount of money. The bonding of the fire trucks and the refuse trucks, that was in the plan from day one in fiscal 10. There was no way we could take a $1.2 million ladder every several years, a $650,000 engine, and all those refuse trucks, whether they were diesel fired or CNG fired. So just a lot to talk about, but I think we wanted to share with you folks after the meeting we had a few weeks ago on the reval that SURF is a good plan going forward for the vehicles. Thank you, Mayor.
Other discussion or questions? Alderman Laws.
I'm not sure if this is the appropriate form, but while I've got you sitting next to me, I've been getting a ton of people have been asking me, they're concerned about what's happening here with the reevaluation. Has this happened in other municipalities that you're aware of, where the property values have changed like this dramatically over a short period of time? And if so, have they done something to alleviate the tax burden on the people who would normally feel it the most? In this instance, homeowners in a certain bracket who might be facing their taxes going up by
Well, I would
5,
say a couple
10%.
of things. The simple answer is yes. I mean, Portsmouth is affected, as an example, far worse. I mean, their property values have gone up. In fact, they're going up so fast, they did a state-ordered revaluation in 15, and then they voluntarily did another one in 17 because the values had gone up so much in those 2 years. And, it did affect homeowners. But I want to stress that this is not something we want to do. I mean, it'd be great if we could just leave things the way they are, because we don't want to see a shift. Now, we asked the DRA if we could delay this for a couple of years. They said no. There is a state law and a constitutional provision which say that we have to do this every 5 years, and they made it, I'd say, more than clear that if we didn't proceed, they would immediately sue us. So we didn't see a real defense. They've got very clear mandates in the Constitution and in state law statutes that this is mandatory. And so rather than try to fight a losing battle, litigate a case we're going to lose, then there's downside to letting to losing that, because the DRA can then take over the thing and bill you and do whatever they want with the value. So we think we'll have more influence on trying to steer it in a direction that's a little more favorable if we're in charge rather than the DRA. But Alderman Laws.
Is there, and again, never dealt with anything like this before. Is there something that we can do? Can we adjust the tax rates to make it so the burden falls equally on residential and?
I mean, the underlying issue is that state law requires, in addition to revaluation, that all properties be valued at every 5 years at fair market value, and requires that all properties be taxed at the same rate.
Okay.
Now, in Massachusetts, there's a different law, and each community sets separate rates for residential and commercial. So commercial is set in most communities, maybe all, I don't know. John lives Tingsboro.
Tingsboro has a flat rate, has a one tax rate, but neighboring communities that have a commercial base, it could be up to 175% of the single rate. So that's
So you
what the
got,
mayor's
you've got one rate, say, $30 for commercial and $20 for residential. That's common in Massachusetts, but that's against the law in New Hampshire. I mean, everybody gets taxed the same. So, I mean, it could be worse in this respect. One big revaluation that took place was in the 1992 timeframe. Caused this 5-year rule had not yet been enacted at that point, but we still had to do the revaluation because it had been quite a period of time. Equalization ratios were down around 40%. And the problem was that right before that, there'd been a major real estate crash. So in addition to, which brought commercial values down more than residential. So in kind of a reverse way, because commercials had fallen more, everything fell, but commercials fell more. So it worked a reallocation towards residential, but at a time when people's properties were falling in value, not going up. So at least there's this silver lining. Admittedly, definitely we'd rather not undertake a revaluation when we see the potential consequences. But at least there's the silver lining that people's homes are worth more than they were before. A $250,000 house is now worth 300 and something. 200 is worth 250 or probably more. And that's the silver lining, but doesn't help people in the short term necessarily. Alderman Laws.
Are there things that we could do, like for instance, the cutoff is 4 units in a multifamily to make it commercial. Is that a state law, or is there something we could do in the city to perhaps make that 3 units? Please don't burn my house down. But I mean, is there something we can
How
do to
many
change
units
that?
do you have?
No, I don't. I have 1
I
unit.
think that's just for the purposes of analysis. Each category of property,
I mean, if they're paying the same rate, I guess it doesn't matter, right?
each category of property is evaluated differently. That's just kind of for analysis. The actual cuts they will take are much finer than that. For example, they're going to look separately at ranch homes from gambrels. They're going to look separately at gambrels from raised ranches, separately from colonial. So, you know, even within single-family homes, there are different types of homes that are going up differently.
Yep.
So it's not just kind of how much is resident? This is just for the purpose of analysis to kind of show you what the trends are. When they do these assessments, they will be looking at very small categories of property. So they will be looking at 2 and 3 family residences separately from single family residences, separately from 10 units, you know. Is this correctly? And within commercial and industrial, you know, shopping centers, there's regional malls, there's strip malls, and the areas of the city are also separate. So, I mean, just because a house went up, there might be areas of the city where houses went up more than others, you know. So they take that's why we're trying to get someone who can take a comprehensive look. They're going to thoroughly go through all these categories.
Thank you, Mayor.
Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you. I would just briefly like to say, I really don't like this, but it's the way it is. It's the state law. Every 5 years, they reevaluate the property. I just hope the good citizens kind of realize that we're right now into a seller's type of market. And we've been through a little bit of time. If you were to sell your particular property, we're going to get on the high end. If you're going to buy another property, you are buying at the high end. You don't really win or lose in that type of real estate environment. Those of us that are currently staying in our homes enjoy looking at the property value going up. But the downsides, when they come up with the reevaluation, we are going to get hit with that little bit more. This is not anything we can solve here in the Horseshoe. This came down through the state, and it comes down with the marketability, the free market of what real estate really is worth. And you ride these type of tides and stuff like that that goes on. Right now, I guess my house is worth a little bit more. I choose to live in it and everything else like that, and I'm going to pay the taxes like everybody else. It's bad day to be us, I guess, right now. But this is the way that it basically is. And it's, I don't see any way around it. We just got to have to do what Nashvilleans really do and grin and bear it and carry on.
Alderwoman Kelly.
So I know in the presentation that we had last week, we talked a little bit about some of the commercial properties that weren't part of the assessment. Are there ways that we can make sure that that doesn't happen in the future, and then that balance can maybe shift?
So remember that no assessments have been adjusted for 5 years. So these sales that have taken place, both sales in commercial and industrial, or commercial and residential, have not changed anyone's assessments. So even if you know, this big apartment complex sold for a lot more than the assessment, it didn't change the assessment. But on the other hand, the home that was assessed at 200 but sold at 300, it's still assessed at 200. They're all remaining constant. Now these so-called, but your question is, can we capture some of these values on these so-called disqualified sales?
Correct.
The sales are disqualified, and things become very technical in this area, I've learned, but they're disqualified only for the purposes of the creation of the equalization ratio. when we go to revalue all the properties in the city, these sales won't be disregarded.
Okay.
So all the sales, assuming that they have any bearing on fair market value, will be considered. Disqualification can recur for various sort of trivial reasons. There's more than one parcel involved, even though the parcels are right next to each other and are basically part of the same property. That was the reason for the disqualification of the property up on, or that was one of the reasons for the property up on Somerset Parkway. But when KRT looks at this, they're going to say, well, yeah, but so what? I mean, all these parcels are part of the same complex. There were 5 or 6 parcels that are you would look at as being just one property, but it's all divided up on, on the deed. So they would look at that sale as being very relevant and reflective of real fair market values for that kind of large residential, and it will not be disregarded. Now, some sales would be, like if somebody sells their home to their child for $1 or something like that. I mean, that's not really taken in seriously, but as a fair market value transaction. But most of these transactions that we've heard about being disqualified will be considered as part of the overall revaluation. And John can correct me if I say anything
That's absolutely correct. And furthermore, the experts that we would like to hire for this job, they have a database of, they track sales. For example, this particular large complex, there might be a sale similar to it in Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts. Those property acquirers, they look at, they're not just looking at Nashua, they're trying to look at what would fit in their asset mix. So that's the value of having these folks, one of the values. We can get into it a little more, but the disqualification, the DRA has a statistical person basically in charge of the equalization, and you have to make the call locally, is it disqualified or not? They plug it in their database and they give us back numbers. There might have been 1,500 sales in one particular year. It could be 400 that are disqualified. So the assessing group have to make the call, as the mayor just indicated. Was it an arm's length transaction? Was it government back? A lot of, I mean, there's like 40 disqualification numbers that our team sends up to the DRA, and then they don't have the bandwidth to determine whether any of these sales are arm's length or not. But when you come to revaluing the property, it's a lot more serious and taken, a lot more serious. I mean, you get an assessment that's wrong, as we discussed, the informal hearing process for anybody who's a taxpayer, and then they have the ability to file for abatements. Board of Assessors would look at that. If they denied it, they could take it to the Board of Land and Tax Appeals or the court. So you have to take this very seriously on both ends, and make sure that the value is defensible. You'll know in the contract a lot of language about this KRT company helping us defend the values for a period of time. And the contract itself, it's very prescriptive. I was amazed. I've learned a lot about assessing, and I was amazed how the DRA has the power of basically having these contracts very prescriptive. They have definitions in the front. They have sections of the contract. So when we worked with KRT, we worked together on the contract, and we're comfortable with the contract. But we'll get into that a little bit later, I suppose. Thank you.
Now, on the 2 points that Mr. Griffin made, the first one being that the market is for large properties is greater than Nashua. For a 600-unit apartment complex, it might be all of New England. I mean, so as he said, you can look to Maine or Vermont or somewhere else in New England to try to determine the fair market value of a big commercial property which may be unique to Nashua, or there might have only been one sale in 5 years. On the second point, the equalization ratio, though it's set because it does serve a function, which is that when a new property is built, and let's say a new house is built today and comes on the market today, how do you assess it? Do you assess it at the sale price? Well, that, at least according to the DRA, in some states, that's what happens. The assessment goes to whenever there's a sale, it's ratcheted up to the sale price, and it stays that way forever until a new sale takes place. But here, they want everything assessed the same, so, or kind of on the equal basis. So if a house today sold, a new house, not on the market yet, was built and sold for $200,000, the equalization ratio of 0.8 would be used. So it would be assessed at 160, not at 200. And if a commercial property within a category that had a 93.93 equalization ratio sold for $1 million, a new one, it would be assessed at $930,000, not at $1 million. The point of that equalization ratio would be to equalize these new properties with the properties that are existing and not tax them at an effectively higher rate. Now, again, this is not something that Mr. Griffin or I make up. This is how state law works. We're just explaining to you what we've learned over time about how this assessment process works. But that's the function of the equalization ratio. And when you bring properties in, it tells you how to assess them vis-a-vis their actual fair market value. Yes, Alderwoman Clee.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that it's clear. The disqualification is of sales, not of properties. We're not saying we're not going to take that property into evaluation. We're just saying the sales of that property or like property is not going to be taken into this process.
The disqualification only means that with respect to the calculation of the equalization ratio, that was not considered as part of that calculation. In terms of, it's still on the tax rolls, it still pays taxes. And once we do a reevaluation, a disqualified sale will most likely still be relevant to determining what the fair market value for a certain category of properties would be.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? I hate to talk on and on about this, but it is kind of a complicated subject. Alderman Laws.
Well, I just wanted to thank everyone for being so patient and walking us through this. I mean, it's a lot of information for us to take in, and I echo what Alderman O'Brien said. You know, I mean, I believe this really is just what has to happen right now. But for the casual observer at home, who just saw, you know, a bunch of people get elected to the Board of Aldermen, they've been saying that they think we're going to spend all of their money, and then suddenly, well, look at what we're doing. I feel like we owe it to explore every option possible to see if we can keep taxes as low, or keep the burden.
Definitely.
Yeah. So
definitely.
I appreciate your patience. Thank you.
You know, looking at the slides, you know, if we can add a little bit through expert analysis and a more proper approach, or a more thorough approach towards a completely thorough approach, let's put it that way, towards the assessment of all properties, if we can add to the commercial tax base and by more accurately determining fair market values, we will lessen any shift from, I mean, there are properties out there, you really got to, 23 Temple, a property we've examined in some detail because we have the substandard housing committee, is assessed at $1.4 million, $1.5 million. Now, that property has 120 units, seems like it has no vacancies or very few, and people pay $500 a month So it's bringing in 60,000 a month. Now, on the income approach, now it's got some expenses, but when we held the committee hearings on the property, it was managed by a guy who's not even paid a salary, according to the testimony. He's gets a free apartment. So it seemed like, you know, based upon the testimony we took, that the operating expenses were not all that great. So based on the income approach, is a property that's bringing in 60,000 a month with some expenses, yes, but still, if that's the case, is that really worth $1.4 million? It's worth more than $1.4 million, right? So just one example. Using the income approach, we may be able to capture, and I think far more, I think that based upon, I think, information that is public or that's been discussed in the business community, the owners of that property have turned down, and this is, I don't want to pick on this one, I'm just giving an example of what can exist, why the income approach might help, have been offered more, about 3 times 1.4 million, and have turned it down. Maybe the income approach can help us realize on that property, and that's just an example, we're not picking on that one, and many others, a more accurate reflection of what fair market value really is. All right, you've gotten the, if there are no other questions, I don't mean to shut off discussion. If there are no other questions, we'll go to the final, the only remaining item on the agenda, which is the last communication.
From Dan Kukin, Purchasing Manager, relative to KRT Appraisal Professional Property Reevaluation with a value of $500,000. Mr. Mayor, I approve again. I move to accept, place on file, and award the contract to KRT Appraisal in the amount of $500,000. Funds are available in Financial Services, SURF.
Any discussion? Alderwoman Clee.
I just have one comment. I'm not an expert in any of these things, but I did look at this, and it's quite substantial. I mean, every little item seems to be in here. I agree with you, and it seems to be very, very thorough. And I think it will help. It will help the city try to find some appropriate evaluations.
Yes, and as you've pointed out, it's a 22-page contract.
Yeah.
Yes. Mr. Griffin.
Just a few other notes. The Department of Revenue Administration, they approved this contract. We got a letter stating as such, so that's good. We can start. If you look on page 21, an extremely aggressive schedule, but one that we can do. Anywhere from the kickoff meeting with the DRA staff monitor, who will be looking after us, to the completion where we need the values by October 1st to help set the tax rate going into next year. Room for informal hearings, but a lot of communication. I think we talked about that at the informal meeting. There should not be any surprises to the best of our ability, and then the informal hearings are where the taxpayers can come in and discuss their particular case. Even when I just a note, even when we lost $1 billion in fiscal 08-09 and another $500 million in fiscal 13, there were people calling. Everybody's going to be looking at their neighbors and so forth, and then we had a few calls. And if you look at the abatements, which is kind of the last effort for folks to reduce their values, those have gone down significantly over the last several years. But whenever you go through something like this, there will be informal hearings, discussions, abatements, and so forth. And just for you folks, we have an overlay account, which is used to support the payment of tax abatements. So the current overlay amount, this annual amount is $2 million. And that's where the, if a taxpayer was awarded an abatement or had an abatement, they would get it out of that account.
But our balance is more than that.
And the balance is more. So as the mayor indicated, there's a $2 million balance, the $2 million amount in this tax year. There's a 1.7 carryover from last year. And there's another $1.5 million in the fund balance reserve. So those three numbers added together is what we have right now.
Which is 5 million or so. So if we
Correct.
lose a case, there's money to back it up. Just on the schedule that you've pointed out, the people will be mailed their valuations in August, and then they will be, anybody who wants an informal hearing with KRT will be able to come in and have a hearing, meaning basically a meeting to discuss their valuation. Those will occur during September. So anybody who wants to discuss their value can meet with KRT and present whatever they'd like and hear from KRT how KRT arrived at the value that they did arrive at. And that covers, of course, residents with homes, but also commercial properties as well. All right, I think there's a motion, right? Did you move?
All right.
There's a motion to approve the contract. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion passes. And I believe we have, we have discussion. Any items of discussion that members of the committee would like to discuss? Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I apologize for my tardiness. I was tied up in Concord and everything, but I see, and I totally support, we're doing a lot of work which is going to be on East Hollow Street with the sewer system, and particularly Temple Street area. And that being a big thoroughfare there. Emergency management, the police, fire, everybody will be notified. Can we get word in the paper and everything that work is going to be done? Because that's a big traffic issue right there, I anticipate.
And you're referring to which item?
This is the first item, and this is the
Oh.
emergency request for TD Earth.
Yes. Yeah, we can make sure people are notified.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Because the street's going to be closed to complete the construction. Any other items of discussion? If not, we'll go to the record of expenditures. Is there a motion on the record of expenditures?
Mr. Mayor, I
Alderman
would like to
O'Brien.
make a motion to accept by charter the record of expenditures.
Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Public comment? I don't see any members of the public present. We do not have a non-public session. Alderman O'Brien?
Mr. Mayor, I would like to make a motion to adjourn.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the meeting is adjourned at 8:24 PM.